They said the war was over, but on a forgotten island in the Pacific, fear still breathed through the mist like a thing that refused to die. A U.S. Army truck rattled down a rutted road and stopped in a wash of floodlights. 19 Japanese women climbed down into ankle-deep mud, their faces washed pale by rain and exhaustion. No one spoke. Silence had kept them alive this long. Among them, 19-year-old Aiko Tanaka held a dented silver music box against her chest. The hinge was bent, the key half twisted, the melody a warped ghost of something gentle from another life. She didn't know why she kept it. Maybe because it had a name even when she did not. Out! Everyone out! The voice was male, American, and firm without cruelty. Aiko's body braced anyway. Orders like that had meant pain for years. She stepped down last, shoes drowning in the mud, eyes stinging from the glare. Barbed wire ran in careful lines ahead. On the other side, American soldiers stood spaced apart, hands at their sides, rifles pointed toward the ground. No smirks, no jokes, just watchfulness, like men guarding a bridge. A tall figure removed his cap as the women passed. Sergeant Thomas Reed, 34, Ohio farm boy turned field medic, looked exactly like a man who had seen too much and didn't intend to add to it. Inside the canvas medical tent, he wiped his hands, then picked up a piece of chalk and wrote on a blackboard in block letters big enough for the whole island to read, "No touching, nurse present, keep hands visible." They weren't just rules. They were a promise he could point at when words failed. Lieutenant Ruth Hale, 28, moved through the tent with a kind of brisk mercy. Gauze stacked, instruments boiled, towels folded. She'd spent years in field hospitals learning that dignity disappears first and is hardest to restore. She would not lose it here. Outside, Kenji Sato, 26, a Nisei interpreter with careful hands and eyes that held two countries at once, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses against the drizzle. His parents sat behind American fences in California while he translated for the Army in the Pacific. He had learned to live with the irony. "Kowagaranide," he said softly to the women. "Please don't be afraid. You will be processed. You will not be harmed." Aiko stared at him. "Why should we believe you?" "Because you'll see," he said, not as a threat and not quite as comfort, just as a fact. At a small table, he typed each woman's name onto a card. The rhythm of the keys sounded like a heartbeat returning to normal. When Aiko whispered hers, he typed slowly, A-I-K-O, then slid the card across the table. "You are not a number here," he said in Japanese. "You are Aiko Tanaka." The card looked impossible in her hand, as if a stranger's name had been rescued from fire and returned to her whole. Inside the tent, the first examination began. Reed folded his hands behind his back and took a deliberate step away from the cot. "Tell her," he said to Kenji, keeping his eyes down, "that Lieutenant Hale will conduct all exams. No male personnel are allowed to touch her," Kenji translated. The young woman on the cot, barely 18, frowned, suspicious. "Why won't he examine me?" she asked. Reed swallowed. "Because that's not how we do things here. Tell her her body belongs to her now." Kenji repeated the words. The girl covered her mouth and nodded, tears slipping out silently as Hale worked with efficient, almost motherly patience. Outside, rain thickened into strings. The women were issued soap, thin cotton dresses, towels. The parcels were small but shockingly clean. Holding them felt like waiting for a slap that didn't come. Aiko walked to the barracks with the others, her parcel clutched in one hand, the music box in the other. The building smelled of wet wood and bleach. Bunks lined both walls, no locks on the door. A guard whistled quietly under the eave, a tune that sounded like home to someone else. Aiko sat on her bunk and unfolded the dress. The fabric was coarse, but new. She ran her fingers over the seams as if to memorize the shape of safety. Then she wound the music box. 3 thin notes rose and wavered. Once a lullaby, now a memory aching to be believed. She pressed the box to her ear and closed her eyes. Private. Step away from that fence. She froze. Footsteps splashed. An MP's voice cut clean through the rain. Orders are orders, kid. You think being curious is worth a court-martial? I was just looking, a young GI protested, embarrassed. Look from over there. Aiko waited for the crack of anger that usually followed rules. None came. The voices faded. Only rain remained, and it sounded, impossibly, like mercy. She lay back and stared at the dark rafters. The silence felt heavy, but not cruel. Maybe mercy, she thought, sounded like nothing at all. Reed stood outside in the downpour, cap tucked under his arm, watching the slim rectangle of light from the barracks window. He couldn't hear the music box, but he felt it, some fragile insistence that demanded he keep his hands exactly where they were. Let them sleep, he murmured, to the rain or God or no one at all. Morning arrived with bacon and steam. The mess hall clattered with tin trays and careful glances. The women sat together, unsure what to do with abundance. Aiko and a sharp-eyed girl named Sumiko Mori stared at their plates, scrambled eggs, a strip of bacon, and peaches shining in syrup like coins. Sumiko prodded a slice with her fork and whispered, "American fruit is loud." "Loud?" Aiko asked. "It makes a sound when it falls on the plate." A small, startled laugh slipped out of her. Aiko felt one rise in her chest and let it go. The sound startled them both. Thin, human, almost indecent after so much silence. From across the room, Reed watched with a mug of coffee going cold in his hand. The normalcy hurt in a good way. "Make sure they get Red Cross forms," he told Kenji. "They should write home." Later, at a rough table beneath a sputtering bulb, the women were handed thick paper with the Red Cross stamped in the corner. Some held it the way one holds a baby, some didn't touch it at all. Aiko stared until the lines blurred, then wrote the simplest sentence she knew. "I am alive." She hesitated, then added, "The Americans did not touch us." The words looked like blasphemy against everything she'd been told, but they were true. She signed her full name and watched the ink dry slow as rain. Days found a rhythm. Work details posted at dawn, laundry, kitchen, sewing. Aiko's hands went to the sewing station by instinct. Uniforms arrived with missing buttons and torn seams. Her needle moved like it remembered things her mind had tried to forget. When she received her first wage chit, one neat rectangle stamped with her name, she tucked it inside the music box as if it had been made for that hiding place. In the afternoons, Lieutenant Hale ran language classes in a converted supply hut. Chalk dust hung in the light like smoke. On the board, "Good morning." "Thank you. Please help me." The women repeated the phrases, their voices low and careful. Then Hale drew a diamond and said, "Baseball." They stared. "America's game," Kenji translated, trying not to smile. Hale explained with a pointer like she was briefing officers. Bases, outs, the arc of a fly ball. "Sometimes," she said, "you can steal second." Aiko raised her hand, serious. "Steal? Isn't that illegal?" Kenji laughed, and for the first time she saw what his smile looked like when it wasn't apologizing for anything. "Not that kind of stealing," he said. "It means running at the right moment." Laughter passed through the room in a small, bright wave. It felt dangerous and necessary. Evenings were for letters and mending. The guard outside the door kept his distance, boots planted where the white line on the ground said a promise had been made. Once, a young GI drifted toward the fence with a Hershey bar clenched like an offering. The MP's whistle snapped through the air. "Back it up, Private." The GI blushed, muttered, "Yes, sir," and retreated. Rules held. One night, a storm came in from the sea, pushing rain under the eaves and turning the compound paths to red streams. The barracks smelled of wet wood and soap. Aiko lay awake listening to the storm and to the breathing of women who were learning how to sleep. She reached beneath her pillow for the music box and wound it gently. The melody limped into the room. Sumiko hummed along, then Michiko, then others, until 19 thin voices braided with the rain. It wasn't a hymn. It wasn't victory. It was survival, sung softly enough not to wake whatever gods had granted them this quiet. Reed paused outside, hat in hand, letting the sound find him through the crack beneath the window. He didn't go closer. He didn't need to. The rules on the chalkboard didn't mention staying for the music, but he knew this much. Sometimes the only way to help was to stand still and keep your distance. The next morning, routine returned like a tide. Work, food, roll call. Kenji's typewriter ticking out requisitions and names. The women began walking the perimeter path in twos, always inside the painted stones, learning the map of a place where boundaries protected instead of trapped. Aiko discovered the canteen carried writing paper, tea, hard candy, and, because the army believed people improved when occupied, cheap novels with crooked spines. She bought a single sheet of paper and saved it for a sentence she hadn't yet found. Kenji watched the compound change in small ways. The women started looking up when someone spoke. They moved without flinching. They asked for more thread, not more permission. He translated requests and jokes and once a complaint about bacon being too salty, which he relayed to the cook with the straight face of a diplomat negotiating a treaty. He carried tension, too, a quiet ache that came from standing on both sides of a river at once. At night, in his bunk, he wrote letters that went nowhere, to his parents behind American wire, to the boy he'd been before a nation decided it feared faces like his. In the morning, he put on his uniform and brought the women forms and words and proof that rules could mean kindness. A week passed like this, then two. The island began to feel not safe exactly, but predictable, and after years of chaos, predictability felt like a kind of grace. Aiko's letter made it to the outbound pouch. Her music box survived another night. Her name remained her own. On a bright afternoon after a rain, Lieutenant Hale ended class early and drew 4 angles on the board again. "Bases," she said with the solemnity of a sermon. "Home is where you're safe." Kenji translated, then left the words hanging in Japanese because sometimes language should echo. Aiko stared at the diamond and traced it on her Red Cross form with a fingernail. First base, second, third, home. 4 points that promised a circle you could run and not be hunted. She didn't believe in circles, not yet, but she liked the shape. That night she wrote on the sheet she had saved, "I heard a rule today that sounded like mercy," then stopped, unsure who deserved to read it. She folded the paper and placed it in the music box beside the wage chit. The camp slept early. The floodlights buzzed. Somewhere far beyond the fence, the ocean made its relentless sound against the reef, as if repeating a story older than war. The women breathed in time with it, and the men who guarded them kept their hands exactly where the chalk said they should be. For the first time in a long time, Aiko felt the slightest loosening in the muscles behind her ribs, the place where fear had lived. She did not mistake it for happiness. She called it what it was, the absence of harm. Sometimes that was enough to survive another day. And on that rain-washed island for one small span of days, the absence of harm felt like a miracle big enough to write down. The calm didn't last. Peace, Aiko would learn, was always a borrowed thing. It started with a leaflet, one flimsy sheet of paper left fluttering against the perimeter fence, wet from the previous night's rain. Reed found it before dawn, plastered to the mud by a boot print. He peeled it off carefully, squinting at the blurred Japanese characters. Even without translation, he could feel the venom in the words. When Kenji Sato arrived, hair still damp from washing, he read it aloud in a low voice. At night, the Americans use the women. By day, they pretend to protect them. There is no honor in obeying invaders. Die clean or live in shame. Reed exhaled, his jaw working as he stared at the soggy paper. Where the hell did this come from? Lieutenant Nakamura's compound, Kenji said. He's spreading them among the men. Calls the women traitors. Says surrender made them less than human. Reed tossed the leaflet onto the table between them. Rumors are easier to feed than the truth, he muttered. You don't even need to prove them. They just need to sound like something people want to believe. By noon, every guard, every cook, and every woman in the compound had heard whispers of the message. The rumor moved through fences like smoke, and once smoke got inside lungs, it stayed. In the sewing hut, Aiko tried to keep her hand steady on the needle. The fabric blurred. Around her, the women stitched silently, afraid to meet each other's eyes. Sumiko leaned close. They're saying things. Aiko didn't look up. What things? That at night, she hesitated. That we're not safe. That this protection is a lie. Aiko's chest tightened. Who said that? One of the guards. He said the men's compound is angry. They think we've betrayed them just by living. The thread in Aiko's needle snapped. She set it down slowly and folded her hands. We survived, she said softly. That's all we did. That evening, Reed found the camp heavier than the storm clouds above it. He stopped by the medical tent where Hale was boiling instruments and asked, You heard? She nodded. Half the men believe it already. What about command? Captain Briggs says it's enemy propaganda. Told me not to agitate the situation. Reed gave a humorless laugh. It's already agitated. Outside, shouts broke through the rain, male voices, sharp, angry, Japanese. Reed ran toward the fence, Kenji at his heels. Under the floodlights, a cluster of male POWs from Nakamura's compound pressed against the wire, shouting in their own language, their faces twisted with something between fury and shame. Traitors, one cried. American toys! Another hurled a rock. It struck the women's barracks wall with a hollow thud. Aiko and the others ducked instinctively. The sound was too familiar. Men shouting, something breaking, the taste of fear returning like iron on the tongue. Reed's MPs raised rifles but held their fire. Hold the line, Reed shouted. Nobody shoots unless I say so. Kenji moved forward, calling out in Japanese, Stop this! They are prisoners, same as you. The war is over. Nakamura stepped out from the crowd, rain slick on his face. You call this peace? You shame us all by protecting whores. Another rock flew. This one hit the ground near Reed's boots. He raised his voice, calm but final. Enough! An MP fired a single warning shot into the air. The thunder swallowed it, and the men fell back. Lieutenant Hale arrived seconds later, soaked to the bone but unshaken. She faced the shouting men and said in a voice cold enough to cut through rain, Anyone throws another rock, they lose food for a week. Kenji translated, each word snapping like a whip. The crowd scattered, muttering. Nakamura stayed a moment longer, eyes burning across the fence before turning away. When the compound finally quieted, Reed walked the fence perimeter until his boots filled with water. This rumor, he said, it'll undo everything. Kenji nodded. Unless we let them speak for themselves. The next morning, Kenji stood in Captain Briggs's office, rain dripping from his coat onto the concrete floor. Let them testify, he said. Briggs looked up from his desk. The women? Yes, in front of both compounds. Let them speak on record. You want to stop the rumor? Let the truth be louder. Briggs frowned. And if they're too afraid to talk? Then silence will speak for them. But if even one of them does, maybe the rest of us will remember what this uniform is supposed to stand for. Briggs rubbed his temples. You really think people will believe a woman over a soldier? Kenji met his gaze. If she's brave enough to tell the truth, they'll have to. Briggs sighed. Fine. Tomorrow morning. Make it official. Rain fell steady as hammers that night. The women were told about the assembly. Some refused immediately, others wept. Aiko sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Sumiko touched her arm. You don't have to do this. I know, Aiko said, but someone has to. She spent the night rewriting her words in careful Japanese. We were told Americans would harm us. They did not. They gave us soap. They called us by our names. No soldier has touched us. The paper shook as she folded it. She slipped it inside the music box, as if the metal might keep it safe until morning. At dawn, the rain eased. The compound was transformed into an impromptu hall, benches under stretched canvas, an open space for witnesses. American guards stood on one side, Japanese male POWs on the other. The women sat in the middle, their posture straight, their faces unreadable. Captain Briggs called the gathering to order. His voice carried like gravel over wet stone. This assembly is to record testimony regarding the treatment of female prisoners of war. Participation is voluntary. Statements will be translated. Kenji stepped forward with the printed camp regulations and read in clear Japanese. No American soldier may touch a female prisoner. Medical examinations conducted by female personnel only. Violations result in court-martial. When he finished, silence spread. Only the faint sound of water dripping from the awnings broke it. Then Kenji said, Aiko Tanaka. Aiko stood. The paper trembled in her hands, but her voice, when it came, was steady. My name is Aiko Tanaka. We were told Americans would harm us. They did not. They gave us soap. They recorded our names. No soldier has touched us. We have worked for wages. We have learned English words. We have written letters Home Kenji translated line by line. Every word fell into the air like something fragile, yet unbreakable. Some people say this is a lie, she continued. They are wrong. American hands have stayed at their sides. Our dignity has been protected. This is what I swear to be true. Kenji's voice didn't shake, but his eyes did. The stenographer's keys clattered, recording every syllable. When the final word left Aiko's mouth, the silence that followed felt sacred. Then Reed stepped forward. He didn't speak. He simply removed his cap and bowed, small, respectful, human. Nakamura's men lowered their eyes. Even he looked away. That night, the stars came out for the first time in weeks. The air smelled of wet cedar and sea salt. Reed sat outside his tent, staring at the sky. Kenji joined him. She did it, Kenji said. Reed nodded. Yeah. Guess words can still win a war now, and then Aiko walked the perimeter path one last time with Sumiko beside her. The floodlights hummed softly. Beyond the fence, the ocean whispered against the reef. They believed you, Sumiko said. Aiko smiled faintly. Maybe they just listened. Weeks later, the trucks lined up again. This time not for transfer, but for home. The women were being repatriated. As Aiko climbed onto the truck bed, Sergeant Reed approached. In his hand was a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. For the road, he said. Inside were sewing needles, thread, and a folded note in neat handwriting for mending things that can be mended. The rest will heal on its own. Aiko placed the note inside her music box. It fit perfectly. The engines roared to life. Kenji stood at the fence, camera ready. Aiko turned, raised her hand, and smiled. He lifted the lens and clicked the shutter. In that single frame, the war looked almost gentle. years later. The camp was gone, buried under a new airstrip. But in a small museum in California, one photograph hung in a quiet hallway. A young woman standing in the rain, head high, paper in hand. Tinian Island, 1945. Most visitors walked past it. A few stopped and read the label, Declaration of Dignity. In 1972, Kenji Sato, now gray-haired and teaching history at a small college, received a letter. The handwriting was delicate, familiar. Dear Mr. Sato, if you remember me, I was one of the women at the camp. You told me truth only needs a place to stand. It still stands. I'm married, I have a daughter, and that photograph hangs above my sewing table. The music box no longer plays, but inside it is Sergeant Reed's note. I still mend things. With respect, Aiko Tanaka Kenji sat for a long time with the letter in his hands. Outside, students hurried across the campus, rain beginning to fall. He looked up, smiled faintly, and whispered, You kept your name. War ends on paper, but peace begins in people. Aiko Tanaka never called herself a hero. She didn't have to, because sometimes courage isn't fighting, it's surviving and still believing that kindness can exist after everything is gone. When she stood beneath the rain holding that statement, no soldier touched us. She wasn't defending nations. She was defending truth itself, fragile, unarmed, worth dying for. And maybe that's why her story matters, because even in hell, there were still hands that chose not to harm. And that silence became proof that mercy, not power, is what makes us human.